One.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Wanda Dowd. I'd like to thank you for coming to this speech on building effective listening skills. I'd like to introduce yourselves.
Hi, Sarah Handy, Brittany Kaplan.
Katie Westerman.
Dennis Bassmason.
Thank you. We're going to talk about today building effective listening skills. We all think that we are good listeners. At least I tend to think that I'm a good listener. But when we're challenged to really listen, it's really, really hard. So what I like to do first is, one, I want to explain that there's an evaluation that you need to fill out while I'm going through my presentation. There's like 7 parts of the evaluation. It's either a yes or no answer. And then I have a few questions that I'd also like you to fill out at the end of class. And I'll ask you some questions during class. The presentation is up so that you can get a good idea of taking down notes as I'm talking, so you can always refer to the presentation for possible answers as we go along, okay? I'm going to read you a paragraph, and all I want you to do is tell me how many U's you hear. Since we all think we're good listeners, this will help you discern if you really are or not, okay? So, I'm only going to read it once, so count the U's as you hear them. I want you to listen as I tell you about your role. You are a vital part of our organization, and as a customer service representative, you represent not only the client, but us too. You are the voice of our client. We value you as a member of our company. How many U's do you think you heard? 6? All of you heard 6? Very good. That means you're really good listeners so far. Let's continue. Okay, great. Normally we think we are expert listeners or good listeners, but when faced with the challenge of actually recalling what you hear, we find that we're not good listeners at all. Even in early childhood, we face the same obstacles as noted in an article called Listening Carefully that showed as children we had to learn strategies to become good listeners. Once the strategies were taught to the children, they learned to use them as they became good listeners on a daily basis. And this evaluation was done by McPherson. In order to become a good listener, you must remove the barriers that are associated with your listening. Today we're going to be discussing what effective listening is, the barriers that impede the listening skills, and the steps to avoid the barriers, and then we're going to discuss ways to improve them. So now let's talk about effective listening. Does anyone have any idea what effective listening really is? You know? Okay, so I'll tell you. And it's right on the board right in front of you. Effective listening. We listen effectively. We understand what the person is thinking of and feeling from the other person's own perspective. Okay? So that's what effective listening is. Not just listening, but also hearing. Okay? So the art of effective listening can be very complex. There's a real distinction between merely hearing the words and really listening for the message within the words. According to an article titled Career Directions Communication Skills, it discusses how we only listen 25% of the time, therefore we're not really taking all of the information in. We're starting to formulate our own responses at the same time that person is actually speaking, which is the wrong thing to do. Now that we understand what effective listening really is, let's talk about trying to avoid the barriers. Some of the barriers of effective listening is focusing too much on outside noise, listening to another person's conversation, doing a lot of self-talk. And when I say self-talk, it's like you're hearing the person speaking to you, you're listening to them, but you're thinking about other things that could have happened during your day or things you want to do in the afternoon. That's self-talk. And earlier perceptions, like perceiving that you're so smart that you don't even need to listen, okay? So those are a few of the things that we definitely want to avoid when it comes to the barriers of effective speaking. Now, in effect, we become listeners by avoiding the barriers. So in order to avoid the barriers, there are several steps we can take as noted in the article by Barriers and Gateways to Communication, where it talks about the steps to remove barriers so we can understand the speaker's point of view clearly. On the board now, we have some of the barriers that we need to avoid, the ways in which to avoid them. Some of the ways you can avoid the barriers is by, one, actively listening to what's being said. It's a thought process. You have to hear it, take it in, absorb it, and then formulate your own responses from it. You want to ask questions after the speaker has finished the section. The reason why you want to ask questions is to make sure that you clearly understand and the speaker knows you're understanding. Another thing we need to do is take points or write down key points or take notes of what the listener is talking about. And we also should never interrupt when someone else is speaking. We need to also adjust to the situation. By adjusting to the situation, you need to give the listener clear eye contact. That shows them that you are paying attention to what they're saying. And try to avoid a lot of the bad mannerisms, like chewing gum, raising your hand in the middle of them talking, or whispering to someone else sitting next to you, or even texting or looking at your cell phone. Those are bad mannerisms that we need to totally avoid. So we have to create a sense of understanding. When a speaker is speaking to you, your listening is also seen by your head nods or what we call verbal cues. By nodding your head shows the speaker that you're actually paying attention, and that's what they need as they go along with their speech. So now that we know how to avoid the barriers of effective listening, let's look at ways to improve our listening skills in general. It's always important to paraphrase. Who knows what I mean by paraphrasing?
Shorten.
Saying something or repeating it back in your own words. Exactly. That shows the listener that you clearly understood the information, and if the listener hears you say something that's incorrect, they know to restate it and change it around so that you do understand what they're talking about. Use great eye contact and listen with good body language. Don't rush the answers quickly. Listen for the feeling behind the words so that you understand why the speaker is up here talking to you, okay? With that in mind, what I want to do is do a little conclusion just to make sure you understand a little bit about effective speaking. So, in conclusion, we've learned how to avoid the barriers to effective speaking. We went through an exercise that showed you, if you listen to the cues, how many you heard. If you heard the right amount, you're a good listener. If you heard less than that, then you probably need to start rethinking and listening more carefully. So during your next class, remember to come in focus with a clear mind to absorb all the information the speaker is delivering, remembering to clear your mind and to be ready to take notes and listen effectively. Finally, as a good takeaway, when you go home and you're around your family and someone comes in and interrupts you while you're doing something, always just stop what you're doing and pay attention and actively listen. It's very important to show them that you care. Okay? Does anyone have any questions so far? No questions? Great. You have the questionnaire, the evaluation, and you have the questions I need you to answer. If you can do that right now, that'd be great. And thank you very much for listening to effective speaking or effective listening.